Who knows? Hey, everybody, and welcome to another thrilling edition of the Boston New Technology Fireside Chat series. Our latest edition is coming to you today, Cracking the Code for Success, from Techspeak to Product Velocity with Nelly Yusupova, my friend, collaboration colleague. We're going to be going into lots of different and exciting areas, but first I want to give it over to Nelly to introduce herself to the audience, and then we'll get into the questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Steve, for
You're welcome.
getting this conversation going. As you mentioned, we've been working on a few different things together. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but it's always great to speak with you. So just a quick introduction. I am a CTO, startup tech advisor, and creator of Techspeak for Entrepreneurs, and recently a co-founder in a well-being startup. It's still being developed, which is why I'm not mentioning too much about it. But I am have been working with early stage entrepreneurs for many, many years, and my goal is to give them the resources and the support that they need to really effectively implement lean and agile methodologies in their startups. I find that a lot of people lack process, which is where they spend so much time and money wasting time and money, thousands of dollars on mistakes that could easily be avoided, which is my work at Techspeak focused solely on that. And I also work with a few startups as a fractional CTO and advisor as well. So I'm looking forward to this chat.
I am as well. So I put it in the event description, but I want to also talk about it. So the origin point for all of this was when during the social audio heydays, I was going through all of the different rooms on one particular application, and Nelly was in this room talking to other founders. Some of them were technical, some of them were non-technical, but what really stood out to me about you, Nelly, is that the way you communicated, you did so with expertise but also with empathy. I think sometimes that is like really something that is lacking both in the tech community, but particularly too, like when we work with founders, you either have people that know a lot but don't really have those soft skills, or you have people who have lots of soft skills, but not as much of the expertise. So you have the combination. It's very holistic. It's very nice. And I know that you like gave a brief background, but the way these things usually go, I know you've been interviewed by lots of different people and been on lots of different shows and stuff, but I want to know, and I'm sure the audience does as well, a little bit more about how you got started. Like, and you can go about that in whatever way you think is best. Like, we'll walk with you down memory lane, so to speak.
Yeah, I had a very rocky road into tech, actually, because I'm a first generation immigrant from the former Soviet Union, and I didn't grow up with technology. And I think you mentioned this word empathy. It really was, and I believe is what my strong suit is. Coming from a non technical background and not growing up with technology, I had to learn all of this, everything I know as an adult. I picked up my first computer science, turned on my first computer in the computer science class, uh, which I took by accident, because this is like, let's go back to the early 90s. Technology was the way to go. It was booming, and everybody was talking about it. So as a first generation immigrant who was very like, I cannot lose any time, I couldn't afford to waste time because we had no money. We needed to make money. And I was just so focused on what can I go into in my career so that as soon as I finish my education, my college degree, I can get a job. And that was my real motivation to getting into tech, because I knew that if I worked hard and I learned what I needed to learn, it doesn't matter what it was, I could get a job right after that. And so, not knowing, like, I actually thought that they were going to teach me Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel really, really well. Like, that's how clueless I was. Um, and it was really hard at the beginning. But what kept me going is this fact that I needed to learn this in order to be successful. And failure was not an option. Giving up was not an option. And I was really determined to get through this. And I actually put put myself all in and finish my computer science curriculum in 3 years instead of the 4 years, the standard 4 years. That's when I fell in love with technology, when I realized that when you are creating technology, you actually have the power to shape the products for users rather than just being the user of technology. And so I totally didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I totally fell in love with the process and technology once I understood the power that it had as a creator rather than just user.
I think that's wonderful. There's all kinds of like thoughts buzzing in my head right now, but before I lose track of one, there is a pattern that I notice among some of the most, the women in technology that I've not only interviewed over the years, but also collaborated with from around the world. And there is this, these common characteristics of resilience and empathy. I mean, there's Melise, she couldn't be here today, but I mean, her reason for doing all this was because she wanted to make it easier. She's also an immigrant, from Turkey, for people to connect with each other. But I also had a friend who has moved away from Boston. Her name is Alana. She created another live streaming app. She saw technology as the bridge connecting people from all over the world to one another. I think that's just so powerful. And in my case, with technology, yes, I totally, agree with that. But also with like entrepreneurship in general, like what I've noticed through the years, I mean, I fell into entrepreneurship by virtue of necessity. But what I've noticed over the years is that it, like technology, is a key that provides access, opportunity. It opens doors and new levels of like, understanding. But, that being said, I wonder, like, do you think going through all of these experiences, these formations, do you think that's what also led you to want to become someone who helps other people, like become like an advisor and basically use what you learned to help them achieve their goals?
Absolutely. I think the key moments in my career, the first one was to decide to major in computer science when I knew nothing about tech. The second one was while I was still in school, going into working in a startup called Web Girls International. This is in the 96 when I joined them, and the go-go days of the internet. And I was grown, like it was drilled into me as a young kid that you need to go get a job in a big company and have a safe environment, and like the corporate thing was always my goal.
What you mean? Yeah.
But getting into a startup by accident actually opened up my eyes to this whole new world of like completely different that I didn't even know existed. And I think prior to that, I always thought that owning a company was delegated to special people, people who had these amazing skills and knew how to run companies and build something from scratch. And when I was at that startup is where I caught the entrepreneur bug and really started to see that with technology, the power to create and being in an entrepreneurial space, that's where the two can come together and give you the, like to me, the utmost power of creativity, coming up with solutions, solving problems for people, because it's so much harder to do that in a big company. And having said all of this, I did go and work for a big company while I was at Web Girls after I graduated, simply because I needed to see what it was like. It was like the positives of entrepreneurship is creativity, moving fast and breaking things and doing all the cool things. But then you're always resource constrained. And some of the things that we'll talk about today is like, how do you get beyond that? And I always thought, hey, maybe in bigger companies, that's a different thing. Like there's no resource problems. And so I went and I tried to work in a big corporate environment. And I always say I lasted 11 months. But I now know that it wasn't a fit for me. And the way that I think and the way I want to move quickly and make change and make positive impact on the world, that wasn't going to happen in a big company. So the other pivotal moment in my career was when I decided, to everybody's dismay, to jump off. And I was given an opportunity of a lifetime to become a CTO in my 20s, to come back to Web Girls. And they said, if you come back, You can be CTO, you can shape the future of this company. And to me, it was a no brainer, right? Because I thought, oh my gosh, this is like, nobody will ever get this opportunity. But to everyone around me, it was a crazy decision. It was so risky. But I saw it as a way to accelerate my learning, being able to not only shape the company, but also the people that we were helping. And Web Girls was all about getting more women online in the early 90s. It's hard to believe that the internet was just springing up, but we had a mission to get more women online, to teach them the necessary skills that they needed to become more technically savvy and use and leverage technology. So for me, it was a personal mission. And I really believe that that was what catapulted me into the work that I do now, because I learned so much on the job, not just about tech, but also how do you manage teams? How do you build a product? How do you market it? How do you sell it? And so it made me a well rounded CTO that now understands all facets of business and tech, and actually growing companies rather than just having a narrow view into tech. And that was really pivotal, because when I go into, and also speaking, right? That's another thing that I developed as a result of saying yes to being a New York City chapter leader. And that put me in a leadership role within the local community. And I started sharing my knowledge. And then I discovered that that was another passion that I had. And so I was able to hone in on that skill. So all of that is really what brought me to all the work that I do today, is helping and being able in a position to hear the issues and the problems and the horror stories when I went out to speak at different conferences and events. That eventually led me to develop Techspeak and the curriculum that I created.
That's wonderful. I think so. There's so much that pops out to me once again. I mean, you basically provided the whole circle, the whole circular understanding. I mean, what would you say is the same in terms of the industry? Like, how would you say the industry has stayed the same? How would you say it's changed? And what are you looking forward to seeing more of, like, in the future, specifically from the perspective of, like, if you could think of, like, the other Nellies out there right now in the universe, like, what would you like to see made possible for them now in 2023 and going forward into the future from that perspective?
So I think the number one thing that I think shifted from the 90s to now is how much easier it is to start a company. We had to have a substantial upfront investment in infrastructure and hardware and all of the things in the early 90s. We had to host our own server, buy our own servers, host them, all of this stuff, like that, all the manual things that we had to do in order to be able to host a site, a simple site. uh, that's no longer a thing. Like, we now have open source, cloud computing, SaaS tools, AI, like all of these make it so much more cost effective to start a startup. And I think what the other shift in the market that I'm seeing is that a lot of people, especially women, are now saying, I can do this, right? I'm maybe lacking some skills here and there, but I have amazing ideas. And then now they're open. Like, over the years in their 90s, nobody did entrepreneurship. It was not a thing. It's not something that people just knew growing up. And I think that shifted. And so between technology being more accessible, and there are so many tools to help you get started faster, and this now openness that I can be an entrepreneur and it's accessible to me, that's where amazing things can happen, which is why I'm so excited to be a part of it now. Even, like, I think the evolution of so many years got me to this point where so many more companies will get started in the next 10 years, especially with AI accelerating everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt. And I mean, I don't mean to plug Boston New Technology, but I am going to plug Boston New Technology briefly in the sense that it's very nice, the makeup of our community. We have many people like you who got their start back when things were like, you were pioneering all of this, but also we have the new generation of founders and everybody being able to like share with one another, and doing events like this are very important in my opinion because And it goes into a question I'm going to ask you, which is, again, kind of like Eastern European contrarian part of me is like, yes, it's now so easy now, but isn't that also kind of a, not necessarily a challenge, but how do you then, because things are so easy and people really don't know what it was like back in those days, those formative days. Like, how do you, if you're a founder or even somebody who's part of a tech startup, how do you maintain your discipline? Say, for example, you have all these events that people are asking you to go to, you have all these tools that automate the work for you. How do you stay focused and how do you build that resilience?
So, for one thing that I always advise all of the entrepreneurs that I work with to is really focus on the problem and the customer that you are servicing.
That's
So,
oh yeah.
right, when you are doing that and you are connected to the source, the person who you are serving, you will hear what's the white noise, what you need to pay attention to, what is not important. And at the end of the day, if you are providing value to the people that you promise to provide it to, you're in business, right? It doesn't like, to me, technology is a way to help accelerate the way you solve a problem. Maybe it makes it easier, maybe it makes it more but it's a delivery mechanism, right? It's a delivery mechanism of the service or of the value that you promised your customer. And when you have that approach, it's so much easier for you to understand what you need to focus on. What are the new things possibly that I can help and use to deliver that value better, faster, more efficiently, etc. But it makes it so much simpler to even make product decisions and develop new sources of revenue, etc. Because you're listening to what your customers' needs are.
And I think that is fundamentally, like, at the end of the day, you being able to have that. I love that you use the word connection, because if you're staying connected to your customer, if you're staying connected to the problem that you're trying to solve, it will keep you going straight down, as opposed to like trying to fall off the rails. And I know that there are, resources out there and people who care. Like, for example, with Techspeak, I want to know, before we shift more towards like this discussion that of what I find fascinating, which is the product velocity. I want to know more about Techspeak, what it is about, and what you're most proud of, and what are some of the things that are coming up for it as well.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I love talking about TechSpeak, and I really created it after speaking to thousands of entrepreneurs in the workshops and conferences that I spoke at. And literally, after every event that I did, I had a huddle of entrepreneurs sharing their horror stories about how much money they lost and how they were working with a dev shop or a developer, and they said they were going to do one thing and got delivered to something completely different. And like, these are problems that cost them thousands of dollars. And I don't mean $10,000. I mean
No, I know
$60,000,
exactly.
$80,000, 150,000 plus of funding that they got for their companies, and they just blew through it simply because they didn't know what they were doing. Or I like, so many issues, right? I heard the red flags and I knew that these things could easily be avoided, and I just didn't see. I was looking for resources to provide them. I never thought I was going to actually be doing this work, but I couldn't find the resources. I couldn't find someone, and that was my goal. What I was seeing is that people may have had a glimpse of this or a little bit of this and some knowledge and of different pieces of the puzzle within the product development, but there was nothing that taught them the entire thing. And there was nothing that was teaching them how to actually implement lean and agile methodologies. So Eric Ries at the time launched this book, The Lean Startup. And I found that so many people misunderstood how to actually put those things into action. And that was my goal. My goal was to show the entrepreneur the entire process from beginning to end. How do you take your idea, validate it, build a product, right? Manage the team through it, and do it really, really quickly so you can reach product market fit so much faster, eliminate a lot of the mistakes, see the red flags a lot sooner, and be able to iterate really quickly to your product market fit. And that was the goal for Techspeak. And I actually the challenge was to do it in a very short period of time, because entrepreneurs are very busy. You can't convince them to take 5 days, which is what I thought my ideal time was, to teach them all of this in over a 5 day period. And I could only convince them to do it, to commit to 2 days. So Techspeak, in its original iteration back in 2012, was a 2 day boot camp. I would show up, I would teach it for 16 hours, 2 days. It was crazy, but so much fun. Um, and that's how I evolved the curriculum, is by being in front of the audience and hearing the questions and teaching them the materials. And what kept me going and realizing that I was onto something was the transformations that I saw happen in just 2 days. People would walk in one day, one way, and just 2 days later were completely different entrepreneurs. They were confident, they were excited, they knew exactly what needed to be done when, and they were all different stages, right? So initially I thought it was going to be geared towards people who just started out, and that was the insight that is kind of an interesting problem to have, is the people who actually saw the value in TechSpeak, contrary to my original assumption, were the people who already went through it, did the startup thing, and they saw how much money they were losing and they wanted to improve their process. And so I had a very interesting group of beginners who saw the value in doing this, doing things correctly from the beginning. But the majority of the people were people who were like, oh my gosh, I wish I had this 2 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, all of that. And so that's the benefit, I guess, of me teaching this in person is, and the challenge as well is when life came into play, because parallel to that, I was also working as a fractional CTO and doing all these other things. I could only do a few of them a year. And when COVID happened, that the benefit of COVID for me was that it kind of forced me to put the program online. And that's the exciting part now, is that anyone from anywhere in the world can have access to the curriculum. And I've structured the program where I have coaching and support that is online. And now I can have such a bigger impact in the world and give this curriculum to more people than in person only.
There are a couple of things that I want to highlight before we move on to the second half of our discussion. First of all, I think a lot of people, including yourself, know that I'm something of a sentimentalist. So what I'm about to say is probably going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I I wonder if you realize, because this is the way it sounds to me. It sounds like you saved a lot of people from some very potentially disastrous outcomes by getting to them and filling them with the knowledge and the experience that they need to avoid situations where, for example, early on in my career, I was in a marketing role for a medtech startup. Obviously, won't go further than that, but what I will say is that the founder was your ICP, basically. The founder was trying to build product, trying to get an MVP produced, and she was getting pulled in all sorts of different directions by these shady developers. They were saying, oh, we can build this, it's going to cost you this amount of money. Then we would touch base with them and they'd be like, oh, it's still not ready yet, we are going to need more money for the development. And even nowadays, working at Prepare for BC, working at Boston New Technology, one of the most common concerns that people in ESOs have, but also one of the most common bits of feedback, as you know, that we get, is founders will come to us with these horror stories, and it completely torpedoes a lot of them, and it's very sad, but it's very reassuring at the same time that there are people out there, genuinely good actors, who are like, no, let's educate, let's insulate people against these risks and prepare them for the reality of what they're going to be facing out there in the wild, because there are a lot of groups out there who will charge, like you said. I mean, I worked with one founder out in California. He had to dip into his and his wife's life savings to pay for the MVP, and it's like crazy. But you know,
I have a student who sold her house
uh huh,
to pay a developer,
right.
and he actually had, this is the sad part, she saw him advise another company and who had a really great exit. So she was like, okay, I can blindly, that's the problem.
Yep.
She blindly trusted this
Yes.
person. She, because she had some validation, she's like, okay, I have a great conviction with my idea. I feel safe. I know it's kind of crazy, but I feel safe that if I invest in him, that I'm going to get my idea developed, right? And it's eventually will recoup itself. But what happened was this guy hired a dev shop in another country
Of course.
and didn't manage them, kind of like had a hands-off approach. And a year and a half later, she still had nothing. She had bits of and pieces of things, and she was
Right.
just at her
Essentially,
wit's
yeah.
end, right? And so if she had implemented just some of the processes, just a few, and didn't have a hands-off approach, because that's the key, is that you need to be able to work closely with the dev shops. And that's also a realization that I made earlier on. I couldn't understand how these bad developer companies could exist, right? Like, how did they stay in business if they were so terrible?
Individuals kind of
And
thing. Yeah.
yeah, and what I realized is that oftentimes miscommunications happen not as a result of one party being bad or good or whatever. It's because there was never a specific expectation set in a language that both parties understood, and that they agreed on, this is what needs to be done, this is how we're going to check each other, and those checks and balances were not there. The entrepreneur doesn't have enough confidence to check in on a regular basis, ask the right questions, like all of these things. If they were done, she would never be in that situation, which is why when I created Techspeak, my goal was to teach the entrepreneurs how to act in their role. Because at the beginning, they're, as you mentioned, they play the product manager role, because they can't hire those people,
So
and
they have to, yeah.
doing all of that, and they're making every mistake in the book. So what my goal is to teach them all of those skills, not so that they can necessarily do it forever, right? But do it at the beginning, so that until they are able to make enough money to hire those people into that place, and then set the right expectations and then manage the process. You can't just have a hands-off approach in anything and expect a good result.
No, I totally agree. And once again, I mean, if it were not for people like you, I mean, the atmosphere would be very uncertain and very cloudy. But I want to shift focus now because thanks to you, I've been studying up a lot on product velocity, and I really want to know more about how you utilize it, in your work with founders. I mean, what role do you think it plays really in, you know, in driving these outcomes for successful outcomes?
So product velocity is an interesting word. And a lot of people understand product velocity as building the product, right? Building the product really quickly so that you can improve it. And to me, that is only a part of achieving product velocity in your startup. Every single facet inside of your company affects product velocity, including your team's ability to execute. Do they have enough tools? Do they have enough process? Are they able to understand what needs to happen? Because if you have all of the amazing tools in product velocity, right, on the tech side, in building the product, but your team has dysfunction in it, you're not going to achieve it. The other part, when we talk about product market fit, we have the market side. You can't in silo improve the product and not check in with the market. This is a big mistake that I think a lot of people, that's different than the traditional model. In the traditional model, most people build a product and then they go looking for a segment of the population that wants it. We call it solution searching for a problem. And it's a wrong approach, because what I want you to do is find the market, find the problem of a market who has a real need for a solution. And if you're able to solve that problem for them, then you're finding the market first, then you're building a product. And as you are iterating very, very quickly, right, and to achieve product velocity, you are not only focusing on the product, but you're also iterating both on the market and the product at exactly the same time. So if you're not reaching your metrics, it's not just, oh, let's improve the product. Well, let's figure out why is it that people are not using the product first. And it's this ability to be able to do both that is going to help you achieve the most product velocity. Um, and I think because of that, you have to structure your teams very differently than traditionally they're being structured. In the traditional manner, the teams are structured with your tech team working here, your marketing team working here, sales and business development are working here. They're all very siloed, and they come together maybe once a month or when the product is launched, right? And to talk about the outcomes, what are we going to measure, all of these things. But if you want to achieve product velocity, in short iterative cycles of releases, you need to be able to structure your team so that your sales, your business development, your marketing people are working with product and dev and QA together. They understand what is needed. They need to, from the market side, and then build a product that does it, and then measure and iterate really quickly on that. So my definition of achieving product velocity is really making improvements in all facets of your business, because if one of them is not working, it's going to slow you down.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. I mean, so your hypothesis proves itself out in a lot of the startups that I've actually either worked with or ones that I've seen, on the sidelines here in Boston who have taken that approach to being very holistic and very, treating their whole team as a coalition. If one side is starting to fall off a little bit, you go and you check it because it's just like, with our bodies. I mean, if one part of us is not feeling well, it's going to affect the entire health of the organism that is us.
Yes.
And at the same time, I also feel like that goes back to what you were saying more towards the beginning about like maintaining focus, that as long as you have this solid understanding to start, it doesn't matter if like you're hearing all of these different, competing voices, competing opinions. No, you should only exclusively focus on this. No, you should only exclusively focus on that. Instead, it's again much more of a whole of approach. But I think one of the questions I had that is based off of, again, a lot of the questions that founders ask us is, how do you achieve all of this when you are resource constrained? So how do you get creative, resourceful, act like a founder, essentially? How do you get scrappy?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that quick iterations require more time and money, and it actually the opposite. By doing faster releases will lead to faster learning, which of course will ultimately save you a lot of time and money from building the wrong things. I think the number one issue, or the two areas where I see a lot of entrepreneurs make or lose a lot of money in product development, is number one, not doing enough validation to really understand the problem that they're solving and for whom they're solving. And then they're building the solution based on assumptions. They don't test that either. And so they build a whole bunch of technology thinking that this is what we need to do to solve the problem. And if you just go based on assumptions, oh, our customers want X or they have problem Y, but don't actually validate the nuances around understanding that problem, you're going to build the wrong things. You're going to build for the wrong customers. You have to redo and recode later. Like all of these things, if you are following the lean and agile methodology properly from the very beginning, it'll actually prevent you from building a whole bunch of stuff that no one will ever use, and actually recoding to, let's say you got the wrong market, right, and now you are pivoting into a different segment, and you're realizing that that segment or the way that you need to solve the same problem for that other segment is slightly different. And now what are you going to do? What are you doing again is recoding, redoing the product, and all of that is costing time and money. So if you're resource constrained, is the reason why you need to be using this iterative approach.
It really is. It is your not only your time saver, but your cost saver. And I think there's something to be said about why this needs to be really emphasized with founders. not only those who are in those peculiar circumstances, which maybe isn't that peculiar. I think a majority of early stage founders are resource constrained, the lucky few being who they are, you know. But I think the issue is that there is actually a lot of psychology there too. No, like when it comes to this aversion to failing fast. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, I'm putting myself in the mix. I think that we get caught up in things that are very curious and not exactly, technical in nature, but things like, imposter syndrome, being very proud, being very hesitant to expose ourselves. But to your point, what I really like about what you said, Nelly, is that you're not going to get anywhere unless you get clarity and unless you really see and understand what is going on, because the murkier things become, the harder it is to navigate. And then what happens, to your point, what happens when disaster strikes because you've accumulated all of this work, all this expenditure of brain and body currency, as a friend of mine calls it, and you have very little to show for it except for, sweat, wasted hours. But if you had pursued the truly lean and agile approach, you would have been able to do things a little bit quicker, failed a little bit quicker, and learned a lot faster. But how would you say, my question then would be, you work with so many founders too. How do you teach or advise those who are afraid of failing fast?
Yeah, I help them reframe failure as a learning opportunity. I mean, this is like the old adage,
Really?
right? When you're failing, you are learning. And so the key to learning effectively is and removing some of that risk is by making your experiments or failures very, very small, which is why in a lean methodology, everything that you develop starts with a hypothesis. Your hypothesis is X. And so you develop an experiment to be able to test that as quickly as possible. The key is to make those hypotheses and the time that it takes to test them as short as possible. Because the smaller they are, the faster you're going to learn, right? Whether it's failure or not, but you're going to be learning whether it's a success or a failure. And the benefit of doing that, so I always define as your startup is a series of well defined experiments that you're constantly testing. And the beauty of doing that, if your experiments are short, is that at the end of every experiment, you're getting data points that will help you make better future decisions. And so if you have this iterative approach of, I'm just going to learn as much as and as quickly as possible, that's the key, quickly as possible, then even if it's a failure, you don't feel like it's a failure because it gives you a learning and it's so small that you don't feel like you've just wasted a lot of time and money and energy testing it. That's the summary of what I call learn early, learn often, learn cheap. I actually this we've heard of fail early, fail often, fail cheap because I reframe it as learning. So to me, and my phrase is learn early, learn often, and learn cheap.
So that right there, the reframing, I love it because I think it encompasses so much about the startup journey, not just about product development, not just about creating your MVP, not just about the technical side, but really the entire thing. There is this specter of failure that is forever, like, haunting the dreams of founders, but it really isn't that. It really isn't. It's a misconception. I agree with you in the sense that, and I always teach our founders this too, we get very attached to the startups in many different ways. Our startups, like it's our baby, all that good stuff. But we also think to ourselves often, this startup is the only startup I will ever do. It is my exclusive thing. But we know the failure rate, and we know that the thing with startups is that they do have a high chance of not working out. But the founder, to me, the more comfortable a founder, the more comfortable a startup team gets with the idea of there being failures, of there being wrong turns, disasters, all of that, it makes us stronger. It conditions us so that this is when we talk about serial entrepreneurs. This is when we talk about visionary people who were able to take failure and turn it into growth. But that growth, of course, to your point, would never have been possible if they didn't see it that way, if they didn't realize that all those times where, excuse my language, but shit hit the fan, that was it was bad. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's always bad when
Yeah.
things go wrong, but it isn't like the end of the world. And with that being said, I mean, what have been we'll do it in two ways. I like this question too. So what have been like some of your the highest points of where you've been, like the things you've been able to do, and what are those things that really challenge you? Maybe they sucked at the time, but now you look back on them and they're like growth opportunities.
Yeah. So I'll start with a challenge. I think in the early days of my career, I had a real challenge firing people. It is a skill I had to work on so much. But I think the one lesson that came out of that is, and the realization that I made eventually, is that fire slow, fire fast, hire slow, right? So hire slow, fire fast has been invaluable in every facet of every human interaction that I have now. There's a huge disservice that I think a lot of people make to even the person who is in the wrong position by keeping them on too long. And there's never been anybody that I've ever talked to who has fired somebody who said, I shouldn't have, who didn't say, I shouldn't have done it, I should have done that sooner. Right. So you want to be able to take your time when you're hiring to making sure that there is match in the DNA of your company, the DNA functions that you really want that person to possess. That's really, really important. And then you take a chance, right? You say, okay, I'm going to commit to this. But just like with a hypothesis driven process that we talked about, you want to be able to continuously test that person and making sure that the decision that you made is correct. That learn early, learn often, learn cheap philosophy really embodies every part of your startup. It's not just in tech. It's the way I make decisions everywhere. So there's never a time in your startup or in your life where you are not going to make mistakes. It's just not possible. The key and the learning that I've had over the years, especially as I embrace this process fully, is that the key is to minimize the mistakes. Because the sooner you can realize that you've made a mistake, the faster you can take steps to correct it. And of course, the less time and money you're going to accrue as a result of making that mistake. And so when it comes to hiring, the reason why hire slow, fire fast is as soon as you realize you made a mistake, you want to be able to deal with it really quickly and put someone else in the role to be able to correct that. And I think this is especially a problem for small early stage startups because every person on the team has 1,000%, right? They have to play at 1,000%, not just 100%. And so if you make the wrong hire and keep them there, it's just affecting the entire team and the output and product velocity and all the things that we're talking about. So that is probably the biggest learning of my career, is like being able to get comfortable with firing and learning that there's a benefit both to the company and the person to be able to do that really quickly. And I think the highlight of my career has been being in a position where I'm because I'm in a startup life, like it just fits my personality so well, like to be able to be creative and help other people and do it together. Those are two things that I love. I love teaching and I love creating, and being in the space that I am, the position that I get to be lucky to be a part of is actually checks both boxes. And I'm really, like, people always say, well, Nelly's always happy. And I always say, well, why not? Because I love the
The
things
same
that I'm doing, right?
thing about us, and I think the reason for that is, and I'm sure I will be getting a lot of notes from our audience too, is like it's very clear to me that you love teaching. It you radiate when you speak about these things. Not bad radiation, good radiation, a glow. Me and my sense of humor, and you also know that when we were preparing for this event, I told you that, we'll use some questions, but I had no doubt that because of the way we converse, you would say something or I would say something that would bring up another thought, right? So I love what you had to say about hiring slow and firing fast. Where I think that really has a lot of usefulness is we all know about the non-technical founder who is desperately searching for a co-founder, not because they necessarily need a co-founder, but because somebody or maybe their own assumptions have led them to believe that the only way they're going to get technical assistance is if they give another person equity and make them their second in command. So I think this learning that you're passing on to people should really be listened by those who are going through that. I mean, obviously with Techspeak, you must come across that too. A lot of people that are struggling with co-founder issues.
So I teach a concept called earn your technical
I
co-founder.
love that.
You have to earn them. They're not going to just show up and say yes to opportunities. And the reason why it's so hard to find a co-founder, a technical co-founder, is because great technical people who are entrepreneurial and are risk, like love risk, they're already working on their own ideas. They don't need a business person to with an idea most often. And so what non-technical people are stuck with are other great, amazing technical people, but they're risk averse. And so the chances of them, when you approach with just an idea and say, hey, come join my startup, are almost not like 90% no. 90% no. And so to increase your chances of getting a yes, you have to be able to get as much traction as possible to be able to get that yes. So the earning of the technical co-founder means you validate your idea, you figure out how to build a community around your idea to showcase your marketing skills. And then you go sell it. You go sell it, you create your MVP, whether it's actual code and you have to outsource it, right? So you have to be able to learn how to manage the team. And then when you approach and then at the same time, while you're doing all of this, you're opening yourself up to meeting other technical people. So you're building relationships. You're actually just like dating, right? You're increasing your pool of potentially getting yeses of the types of people who can maybe help you and advise you. But you don't ask them to come join your startup as a co-founder until you have something where you can change the conversation. You shift the conversation from I need you to here's a great opportunity. And you should be lucky to be a part of it. This is a game changer because now it's an opportunity and they are looking at it. Oh, okay, I have an opportunity to do X versus come jump on this train. If I don't, I'm going to miss it. That's how in my current startup, I met my co founder on Clubhouse, actually. I've never met her. She is in Denmark. But what she did over a year and a half, so we made a connection over a year and a half, she went and she found a client. She got all of this stuff kind of ready. And she approached me and she said, Nelly, I want you to be a part of this. And I was like, and then I almost never say no. I get lots of requests every single day.
Me
And I
too.
was so impressed by this woman and the stuff she was able to pull off, the impossible things. That gave me the confidence that not only was this in the space where I love, other than tech, that this is a woman I want to be around, and I want to build a business with her. Right. And that's how she got me to say yes. And that's how almost every single person who has gone through Techspeak who needed a co founder was able to get their co founder if they really wanted one, right? But building relationships is really important because, especially for non-technical people, when you hear 100 no's and the one person that says yes, you're like, oh my gosh, I must say yes. And they could be completely the wrong match for you, right? You're now asking someone to marry you when you know nothing about them, you know nothing about their values, their how they want to grow the company, what type of expectations they have. All of these things are never talked about or discussed. And then the number one reason why a lot of startups fail or never work out is because of the co-founder relations not co-founders not getting along, or things fall apart with co-founders. And that's the one thing that I think earning your technical co-founder is going to give you the opportunity to take your time. You learn, you get your skill set. You are going to run this startup with or without that technical person. And then you present them the opportunity and you can help scale that process together.
I want all the founders who are listening to this to take careful note of that because we're talking about technical co-founders, but man, it applies to every other hire as well. And it also applies to those founders that are thinking maybe they want to be venture backed. Because I always teach too that despite working for a company called Prepare for VC, I most definitely do not believe that all startups are needing to get investment. But for those that want to seek investment, you should be treating investor relations in the same exact way. Nobody likes desperation, and also nobody appreciates basically just being looked at as a set of skills. What I love about what you're emphasizing is that you're giving dignity to yourself, but you're also going about this in a relationship driven fashion. Because ultimately, if you do the work, you show your work, but you also really get to know people, then you'll know for sure. There will be true certitude instead of anything that's being influenced by. The investors are never going to invest in me unless I get this technical co-founder. I'm never going to experience user growth, product velocity unless I do this. So, I mean, I think that's really, really important. And before we end our conversation today, I want to ask one more question, which is I know for a fact that people are going to want to get in touch with you. So, how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm on social media, digital woman everywhere. So it's easy to find me. So reach out on social media. You can also go to techspeak.co. And that's the website where you can learn more about Techspeak. I also have some free classes there as well that are on demand and also live that I do all the time. So there's a lot of resources that are free and paid that are available to startup founders. And if I can help in any way, please reach out. I'm very easy to get a hold of.
Fortunately, you are. Yeah, fortunately, you are. I'll also give you the last word in terms of do you have any like parting words of advice for people that are trying to either like get into this startup world or who are wrestling with any kind of particular problems related to technology?
Yes, I think specifically for non-technical founders, I think the the default is to say, I'm not technical, this is not my job. That's what I need my technical person for. That is never going to fly. So if you're in a position where you're relying on technical people, even a co-founder that you absolutely trust and love, you have to be able to get yourself educated and become technically literate. So that means you need to understand what's happening in the tech space. You need to understand the basics of all the different types of technologies that are out there, the databases, APIs, SaaS, AI. How do you actually use and understand and use and leverage these technologies in your business and be able to converse about those things with your technical team? What I find is that if you have a complete hands-off approach, even if you have an amazing team, that's not to say that you can't check each other. And when you challenge each other is when you can come up with the best innovation. And I think a lot of non-technical people, because like they don't have a blind spot that a lot of technical people have. If you understand some of the technology as a business person, you can make connections on between that technology and your idea so much faster than the technical person who is only focused on the technology side of it, where they are solving problems with technology. So as a founder, if you can get yourself technically literate enough to be able to start to see the potential and actually make those connections, it's going to keep you more innovative. It's going to give you more confidence to run your startup and actually be the leader that you need it to be. And it's going to be a game changer. So if that's not you, and that doesn't stop, right? Because technology changes at the speed of light nowadays. So you have to be able to keep up with all of the things and not just say, well, this is not for me. I'm going to hand that off to someone else.
What a great way to end our chat, which I have thoroughly enjoyed, my friend. It's been so nice speaking with you and being able to share our conversation with the wider world. So once again, everybody in the Boston New Technology community, please get in touch with Nelly. We'll be working with Nelly a lot more often now, so be a familiar face around. And thank you again, Nelly. This has been very fantastic. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.